Welcome to Geely Pro Talks. I am super excited about today because I have to first say, people always ask me, what inspires you? Who do you admire? The guest that I have today is one of the people that I've been introduced to informally, but I admire so much. And you're going to understand why once we get into the conversation. But before we begin, I had to preface everything we're going to say and talk about by just talking about how much I admire this strong, intelligent Black woman who is literally trailblazing in this new world of crypto and crowdfunding, but she's also a lawyer. So, without further ado, I would like to introduce Dr. Professor Esquire. This is Maureen. So please introduce yourself, give us a background about where you're from, your education, and we're going to get into exactly who you are and just what makes you this genius that we're going to talk about today.
Okay, well, that was quite an intro. I feel like we might have to have you do my intros from now on. So my name's Maureen Murat. I am from Miami, Florida, originally. I am a child of Haitian immigrants. So I feel like that also kind of fuels, a lot of my, I guess my work ethic and things like that. Because I mean, if you know anything about immigrants, I feel like immigrants work hard, right? So
yeah,
and they tend to pass that on down to their children. And so I'm in DC now. I've been in DC since 2008, which is a long time now I think back about it. But it's been enjoyable. Like I said, I am an attorney. I went to law school at the University of the District of Columbia, David A. Clark School of Law. And I graduated in 2016. So I was, considered a non-traditional student. I worked during the day and went to school at night. And I survived. So it can be doable if anybody's thinking about that. It can be done. I have a business called Crowdy Advisors. I actually started that business in August of 2016, shortly after I graduated law school, because I was supposed to start working with the startup, but things didn't work out. And so I was like, okay, well, I could do this, without them. But the other thing that prompted me to start my business was because even though I had good grades, I had, experience because I was working as a paralegal while going to law school. So it's not like I was new to law necessarily, even though law school is another world, another beast. Yeah. But so anyway, all of that, and I still wasn't able to get the traditional jobs you're supposed to get out of law school with that kind of background, right? I didn't get any clerkships. I applied all over the country. I did interview for a few clerkships at courthouses, but some of them didn't work. And in a way, I did get offered a job for a family law one. And I spoke to one of my mentors and I was like, do you want to be a family law expert? No. So why don't do it, right? Don't go down a road. And sometimes it's hard because you need the money, right? And you want the experience and you want something good on your resume, but it might not always be, in line with your goals. So anyway, so I started this business and initially it was supposed to help people raise money with crowdfunding because that was a new law. But then I started coming across people who needed a little more help than that. They weren't ready to raise money, or maybe they thought they were because it seemed easy, but it's not, right? That is one of the hardest things you can do in your business, aside from finding something to sell and offer, right? And so then I started doing consulting stuff on that type of work, helping people just get their documents together, et cetera. And then one of the ways to get business, at least in the DC area, is to go all these meetups. I know they don't do meetups, well, probably because of the pandemic. There are not many meetups, but back in the day, if you will, there were meetups, you could go to a meetup every day. Seriously, on the weekend, in the morning, in the evening, the lunch meetups, all types of meetups. So I was going to a lot of them, just trying to look for clients. And someone, said to me, why would I do crowdfunding when I could just do an ICO? And I was like, what's that?
Right.
So, so I was like, something about that doesn't sit right with me.
Right.
So that's how I kind of got into crypto from that point, right? Like, because that was a time, this is end of 2016, 2017, where people were just putting stuff up on a website and like, give me money and I'll give you a coin. And that's it.
Yeah.
So I was intrigued by that, but then I realized like, okay, I had to figure out my place in that world, because most people were either tech people, right? And like they knew the tech, or other people who were like trying to sell a service, right? Trying to sell a dream that wasn't going to come to pass.
Yeah.
And so I was like, okay, well, maybe I could, be the practical, like be the person in the middle. Like, yes, this is great, but you're still a business. So you probably got to do these things too, And so that's worked out, I think. And then I was working at a firm, but now I'm working at a regulator's office in the District of Columbia. So I focus on banking and financial services. And honestly, stuff that I've done like with cryptos and all that has helped me to get to this position. So even if it might seem a little rough in the beginning, you're kind of like prepping yourself for the next big thing. So anyway, that's my spiel for now.
Man, okay. So you just triggered so many things in my mind. And the first thing I want to touch on is how you've handled pivots, because let's talk about the traditional way of getting to become a lawyer.
Right.
And I really want to dig into how you overcame that pivot. And I used to tell my scholars all the time, when you graduate from college, it's like this rite of passage, and you family's there. It's like, I just did this, and this is a major accomplishment, especially if like you're a first generation college grad. But then you have to realize there are probably like 10 million people that are graduating on the same day as I am.
Right.
And let's just say 5% of them are in the same major that I'm in. That means they're going after the same types of jobs. That entry-level position, maybe I have some internship experience that sets me apart. But how did you deal with the pivots, and what made you, was there a point where you say, you know what, I might have to bite the bullet and do something I don't want to do to get to where I'm trying to go? Or were you like, you know what, I'm going to get what I want no matter what, I'm just going to keep going forward? Like, how do you deal with the pivot?
So that took some time, and I still feel like every so often I have to still pivot now, right? But I think initially what kind of drove me was knowing that, one, to your point, I was the first attorney in my family. My uncle came from Haiti to see me graduate. I was like, so all of this. So I felt like I had this, maybe not a monkey on my back, but there was definitely this, like, you have to do well. Like, you have no room to not do something. You know what I mean? You can't not do anything. And so so having that, in the back of my mind, they didn't come all the way over here for me to be like, oh, this didn't work out, so I didn't have time to pity myself really. And this is where a support system, or like friends, even when you don't believe them, they might be like, oh, you're great, Maureen, or you're great, Anita, you're this and you're that. In the back of your mind, you're like, no, I'm not. I am not doing well. But them reinforcing that, I think, was very helpful in helping me, get to the point where I could believe them and believe that for myself. And in terms of like really figuring out the pivots, I definitely did things that I was like, I don't want to do this. When I first started, my first client was like a tax client. So when I was in law school, I thought I was going to go and do a tax LLM, because I really enjoyed my tax classes in law school. But I had taken, I took the New York bar first, and I took the Florida bar, and I was like, I am tired. And this was like right after school ended. So I was like, I can't go to school right now. So
hold up. Did you wait from undergrad to, did you jump right into law school from undergrad, or?
No, I didn't. Well, I didn't go to law school for several years, because actually, so another thing, I was starting to apply for law school, I want to say in 2008 or 2009. Mind you, I didn't start till 2012. I was put on wait lists or rejected for like 3 years in a row.
Wow.
So what I did was I got a master's instead. I got a master's in Homeland Security with the focus on like disaster management, because I thought, okay, well, I'm in DC, all these veterans, this is what they're doing. Let me see if I can do this, or at least do this in the meantime, because I know I'm going to go to law school. It's just taking a little time.
Yeah.
So anyway, so then I got in 2012, and I actually got into that school only because one of the judges I was working with as a paralegal, he taught at UDC. UDC was not on my radar. And he was like, you should apply there and go talk to Dean Canty, who was the Dean of Admissions. I was like, okay, because, UDC did not have like this good reputation in terms of law school, right? So anyway, I did that. I went to go see Dean Canty, and I had walked around the school. I sat in on classes. People came up to me, gave me their email. It was such a different experience from when I went to go sit at Catholic. At Catholic, they didn't even see me. It was like I wasn't even there. At George Mason, it was like, oh. So it was so weird that, that environment was like, oh man, why didn't I even think of,
this HBCU.
This HBCU, exactly.
Most people don't realize that. And it's like Central, Howard, and I think FAMU.
FAMU has a law school, yep.
Yeah, so we have HBCUs. Yeah, we have HBCUs with law schools.
Yes, and I am so glad I ended up going to UDC because, the education was great. I sat down for the same bar everybody else sat down for, I passed, some people didn't, and sometimes it's just one of those things where a lot of it has to do with society, right? Yeah. White is right, etc. And whatever it is, I'm still glad that I was able to go. But in terms of, I think to answer your question about pivots, I think what was running through my mind was I can't not do this, but I was also okay with, to your point, taking a step back to go take a step forward. So like my first client with Crowdy Advisors was someone who's, behind on their sales and use taxes. And I was like, I could do that. I don't want to do that. I don't want to be crunching numbers and helping people. But I also understand that this is like an important thing for business, right? You get behind enough, the IRS or the state comes after you and you are in bigger trouble. I was even doing like, talking to people, like getting their business plans together and things like that. Obviously I had to I eventually stopped doing that because one, it was draining because it was just me, but two, I didn't feel like I was that was where I was going to do my best work, if you will, and be the most helpful, because there are plenty of people who can go do a business plan or things like that and help them. But I think for the crowdfunding, because it was so new, I wanted to really try to focus on that. So I had to do that. But I think with every pivot, I just had to remind myself that, this is just a little detour, right? You're going to still get to where you're trying to go. You definitely have moments where I definitely had moments where I'm like, what am I doing with my life? Like, what am I doing here? Even in DC, why am I here? So, but you just keep going. I'm not really sure how else to say it,
Yeah. No, I think that's all you need to hear when you are in those moments, because the opposite is what's in your face. And it's just be stuck, because you're like, I don't know.
Right.
And sometimes that I don't know, not even sometimes, the I don't know has to turn into, I don't know, but I'm gonna keep going, right? You have to use it as fuel to actually take the next step, whatever that may look like. And it's just amazing how things turn out when we take initiative, especially when it's a gray area and we're just not familiar with it, or we just use what we have. Like you say, your client you just use what you had. This is the knowledge that I had. It's not the most glamorous job, but at the same time, this is my step forward. So yeah, that embracing that initiative and just taking the next step, whatever it looks like, is the next step to get to where you're trying to go. So thank you for that. And I'm glad that you weren't on that traditional path, because that's what's helped shape your story. Man, I have 3-part series about everything I want to talk to you about, but I know I don't have all that time in the world. I just want to get into this crypto, blockchain, equity crowdfunding, because it's life-changing, especially when you're an entrepreneur. especially when we're living in this digital era that is just going to keep, it's ever increasing. It's going to keep growing. And I was talking to a friend earlier, and we were just talking about how the jobs today are not going to be the jobs we have in the next 10 years because of the digital aspect that we're going to have to, that these students are going to have to incorporate. It's some type
Right.
of data analyzation skill set, some type of, you got to learn some type of software as a service component, to get the job done. And that's just something we weren't taught, at least not in undergrad. Maybe it's
Right.
introduced, in grad school, but it's definitely something that I have to learn now, and moving forward. But please, please, please tell me how you got into blockchain equity crowdfunding. Like, I don't know if it was the Jobs Act that sparked your interest or if it was cryptocurrencies. Like you mentioned ICOs. So what was it that really sparked this, and what sets you apart is this right here. We're gonna get into this. But but tell me how you got into it.
Sure. And before I get into that, you said something that I think is really important about, how the jobs of today are not necessarily going to be the jobs of tomorrow. But I also feel like it's unfair to expect a lot of, because the thing is, then people are just assuming that the only job that you can have is to be in tech in some form or fashion. But you can be in tech and not be coding, right? You can be in tech and being the storyteller. You can be in tech and being the marketer. I think a lot of it has to do like with understanding what the tech can do and being able to use that to your advantage and to help people. So it doesn't necessarily mean that you have to be like a software engineer to be able to do this, to be in tech. I've definitely met people who were software engineers, couldn't sell what they were built. They couldn't talk about it, and so you do need other types of skills around you, right? It's still a business. You still need all these different types of areas covered. So how I got into crypto, blockchain, and all that stuff was really through, finding out about ICOs. But I had already had my interest peaked in equity crowdfunding because that was through the Jobs Act that became effective in May. So when I was supposed to start with that startup, we were going to go around trying to help business schools find a way to help their students who tend to be, entrepreneurs, right? Crowdfund. So there were some ego issues that had nothing to do with me. So that didn't work out. But I realized that because I was going to be doing the compliance stuff, so the documents that have to go through the SEC and all that, I was like, well, I could still do that, separately on my own. And so that's how I kind of got into it. And then with blockchain, I think blockchain became known to me after learning about cryptos, because cryptos was what was part of the hype, right? Blockchain, right. Not so much. So it was like, okay, what is so cool about this, And so, and that's where you go to more events and meetups and conferences. And so that's one of the good things I think about DC in terms of like events and getting information and knowledge. Initially, I wasn't like, oh, I want to be a thought leader, but it was just a way for me to just, write things out, like what I was thinking, and putting them out online and getting a Medium page and things like that, just as a way to be like, okay, maybe we should look at it from this way or think about it from this perspective. And so because there weren't that many people really on the legal or compliance side of things, it kind of helped, right? In the sense that, oh, there's somebody talking about it. Yeah. Let's see if she wants to be on this panel, etc. Granted, we've come a long way, right? There are definitely a lot more Black women and women of color in the space. But 5 years ago, not so much. And it was very weird because I internalized it. I was like, am I the only one that realizes that I'm the only one here? Yeah. So it was a weird moment, because part of me wanted to just stop coming, right? Because you get that, they don't want you there, and they make it very, very clear. It's like, what are you talking about? Do you code? And things like that. So, they tried to put you in some sort of a box, and I didn't quite fit in any of the boxes. But I liked listening, and hearing about the technology. Even if I couldn't code, I wanted to still be able to understand it, right? And so that's how that kind of, I decided I was going to still keep going. But you know, it was rocky for a little bit.
Yeah, I want to touch on something that I think and I hate to say this, hopefully it'll change in the future, but I think every Black professional is going to have to face, and it's that moment where you know that you're the only Black person in the room.
Mm-hmm.
And how do you deal with that? And I'm not just saying like at a meeting. I mean, every day you're in an environment where you're the only Black person, and
Yeah.
I think everybody has a different story of how they've responded to that, because it can either make you or break you,
Right.
and especially when you're in such a new field like blockchain and cryptocurrency, where I'm pretty sure it's a lot of white males because that's just the tech industry in general. But I think when we do find ourselves in those moments, we have to realize that it's a greater moment than we realize, because it is us and we are the only one there. So there's a reason that's greater than this difficult understanding that I am the only Black person here. What do I do? Right? I found this opportunity in what you just said to encourage us to be the unique factor, to be the only Black person in the room, and be okay with that and say, this is a weapon now.
Yeah.
So
it is.
Yeah.
I mean, sometimes I definitely felt that way, especially when you go overseas, they're not really used to you seeing you. But I definitely
talk about what you do overseas. Please get into that.
Well, I mean, so normally if I'm going overseas, it's because there's some conference or event, and I will be on the panel to speak from, I guess, the perspective of businesses, or, the legal perspective in the States. And so that's been really good, because in a way, even though they're like, oh, I've never seen anything like that before, but like the information I'm bringing is obviously something they want to hear, right? Because they want to, a lot of times people want to come to the US to kind of try to build their business, raise money, scale, etc. So it's definitely one of those things where like takes some getting used to. But to your point, there is this unique factor, because so it's two-sided. It's like, oh, they're talking to you because they're really interested in what you're saying, but they're also like so surprised that that you can speak well, or that, you're articulate, and blah, blah, blah. So it's kind of like a double-edged sword, but you do get used to it. And the benefit of that is you try to bring other people along with you, right? So that because they got to get used to seeing you, but they got to get used to seeing other people too. And I've had great people in my life who have helped me, right? So they've taken me along into some of these rooms with them, and I'm forever grateful, because otherwise, I would have probably been like, this is not for me. And I mean, there's this saying, I think it's who Myleik Teele is, right? From the Girl Boss. She always has these great sayings. And recently she posted something like, and I think I've seen this in other iterations too, like, you belong in every room that you're called into, or something like that. And I wish I had that, that's like a great mantra to tell yourself when you get into these rooms. And to your point, I think people will still experience that from time to time. So it's a great way to go in and be like, they called you in here, that means you belong in here. So, I think, kind of talking yourself up will help too.
Yeah. Speaking of those rooms, what's like been the coolest place, or what has, if you've had more than one, I get it, because you've been all over the world, but like, what did you ever have a moment that just was like, oh my God, I never in a million years thought I would be here? Like, was it a country you woke up in? Was it an invite that you had to speak at a different conference? Like, what was it?
I think the most, I mean, I have been to some cool places. So, but I think Vienna, Austria, and going to speak at like their parliament, because it was a crowd dialogue. Crowd dialogue is like a crowdfunding conference for the EU, and they had it in Vienna. But that was another room where myself and Isioma were the only ones there. Yeah. But it was it was so beautiful in there, and just so, I don't know, I was just like, I never would have, put that on my dream list, right, or my bucket list to go to Vienna. So yeah, that I think was the coolest. And we did talk about crowdfunding that day, crowdfunding and marketing, because that was the theme, but it was very, very cool, very, very cool. Yeah. Okay. I would do it again,
That's awesome. Mine was China. And it wasn't the first time I went to China. Yeah, it wasn't the first time I went to China. I was a, typical American. It was like, oh my God, the food, the people, I don't know the language. I was 21. I was just like, let me just get my credits and go home. I was there for 6 months and it was like torture.
Oh, wow. Right? Okay.
Like, ugh. And I did it because I knew it would enhance my resume. Honestly, I did not think outside the box, but I saw so many entrepreneurs who were Black from Africa, from all parts of Africa. And I was like, oh, so this is how y'all hustle. This is different. Right. Y'all come here and start businesses during your undergrad years, and then you go back home and make the connections. Oh, okay, we're missing it over here. But the aha moment was like, I'm back here again when I was in grad school. So I was like, okay, all right, God, I see you working. Let me just go with the flow. But yeah, those moments, especially when we don't plan them out and we realize like, I'm supposed to be here. Like those are the moments that you really just embrace. And that's what encourages you and encourages the next generation. So thank you for sharing that. I want to get into equity crowdfunding because this is like, it's groundbreaking and you're a trailblazer. And this is just a prime opportunity to just synergize these things and just take this moment and run with it. And it's going to impact somebody in a very positive way, just from the conversation we're having. So I want you to give a brief overview, because I know you can really get to the weeds of crowdfunding, but just give us a brief overview. And then I'm going to say something before you do that, just to kind of let people know how much of a guru you are in this. You know, along with Samson Williams, you guys created these workbooks.
I know you have
right? I have both versions. You probably got another version since this one.
But yeah, there's a new one coming out. Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
Because the rules changed. So yeah.
So Dr. Maureen is going to talk to us about the JOBS Act Equity and Debt Crowdfunding Workbook. But I want to say this, and this, you know, take it with a grain of salt if you're an educator. I believe that this type of material should be what we teach in high school. So instead of taking calculus and trigonometry, this is what we need to start teaching our students, because it essentially says, if you have an idea, we can take it and run with it. And we can incorporate all the different terms that our students are not learning in high school, from venture capitalism, private equity, to Series A, Series B, and all. What does all of that mean? And it puts it in a very real way. Because you essentially can say, I have an idea to start a t-shirt business. Okay, well, let's raise $1 million and find out how we can do that. And is this a valid way of doing that? So I literally, when I think about what education reform is about, this is one of the things like top of mind, that I would go to the Prince George's County public school system and say, this needs to be a class. This is what we need to teach. This is what we're talking about, financial literacy, right here in this book. So please give us an overview of equity crowdfunding. I'm literally about to grab a piece of paper and a pen and just say, let's go.
I appreciate you. Before I get into that, that green book was our first book, and you were the first person to buy the green book. Yes. And I was like, oh my God, somebody actually bought the book, you know?